This is political and economic change in Iran regarding the early empirical period of Iran. And during this period of Iranian history, we're going to be taking a look at four major empires. The empire of Cyrus the Great. If you go down to letter C here, the empire of Darius the Great. Both of which will be conquered by Alexander the Great. That's back up on letter B on the outline. And then eventually the Safavid Empire, which rules Iran from 1501 to 1722. Now, in looking at Iranian history, the very first empire they have is the empire of this guy, Cyrus the Great. And if you'll notice on the outline letter A, he's given the title of Shah, which is a title that in ancient Persia meant King of Kings. Now, Cyrus is probably one of my favorite people in history at all, for a couple of different reasons. First of all, he's a great military leader, and that's to be respected. He also is an outstanding emperor who builds a very highly centralized government that's surprisingly benevolent to people. It was the Persian Empire, very first major empire in the history of the world. But he doesn't appear to be a guy who was too full of himself. This is the grave of Cyrus the Great in Iran. And if you'll notice, there's nothing really ornate about it or elaborate. It's just a simple grave for a simple guy who was an outstanding mind, as far as most political scientists would tell you when they look at political history. Now again, Cyrus builds what is known as the Achaemenid Empire, or the Persian Empire in the Middle East. And it's going to last roughly 200 years, from 559 BC to 530 BC. Now at that time, again, it's the largest empire in the world that had been seen to that point. But there was one particular aspect about Cyrus and the way he ruled the Persian Empire that was unique. Cyrus would conquer people, and most emperors, when they conquer people, would put them into slavery and make them do what they want. Cyrus would conquer people, but then often let them keep their customs and have human rights, particularly when it came to religion. Now, for this reason, a lot of the people, most of the people who lived under Cyrus's rule, didn't feel like they were subjected by him. They actually respected him. Those that he conquered almost were pleased that they'd had their territories taken over by Cyrus. Now, for that reason, Cyrus is one of the most admired figures in world history, political history, however you want to say it, for a couple of reasons. First of all, he built a very successful government that influenced modern political philosophy. And now we're looking at A5 on the outline. First of all, going down the list there, A, B, C, and D, he used governors to rule in all of these different areas. They were called satraps. And he's really the first one. I mean, people had used governors before, but he's the first one to allow these governors in such a wide area to have such significant local rule. Now, of course, the people of these regions like that, and each one of these regions I'm pointing out here has a governor, and the governors are allowed to rule as they see fit, with Cyrus trusting them to do so. Now, you would imagine there'd be a lot of corruption there, but it actually works out pretty well, mostly out of respect for Cyrus. He also promoted human rights for all subjects in the empire, and would put his philosophies in written works for later government figures to follow, including Thomas Jefferson, who was a great fan of Cyrus the Great and kept Cyrus's writings in his personal library because, Jefferson liked to be a philosopher about government in a lot of different ways, and Cyrus was one of the main figures that he used to read. His legacy is also significant enough that in Olympic Park in Sydney, Australia, which is about as far away from Iran as you can get, a statue has been erected to him because of the influence he's had on human rights and general ideas of governing, and governing well, taking a large territory, and being fair to the people that you conquer. Now, of course, that doesn't mean it's going to last forever, and eventually, after Cyrus dies, Persia is going to be conquered by this guy, Alexander the Great of Greece. Now, Greece and Persia were very, very different in the way they governed. Cyrus had a fairly centralized government that allowed for local rule. Greece was purely democratic. And when Alexander conquers, Alexander's actually from Macedonia, north of Greece. But he conquers Greece, and he conquers the Persian Empire, and he loves Greek culture so much that he spreads it throughout his empire. However, he did have a lot of respect for what the Persians were doing, so he let the Persians keep their centralized political structure as opposed to a more democratic one. Okay, take a look at letter C for a second, because we're going to talk about this guy. This is Shah Darius the Great, and he had a lot of titles for himself. He's a little bit more of the emperor that you would figure or expect when you think of the term emperor. He referred to himself as the king of kings, the king of Persia, the king of countries. Definitely a little different than Cyrus. And to embody that, all you have to do is take a look at his grave. Now, it's the Middle East, so you're not going to find a whole lot of gold in the desert or anything like that, but this is pretty elaborate for a grave, and I don't have any disrespect for Darius, outside of the fact that he referred to everyone in his country as his slaves, even his closest advisors, the wealthiest people. If they were under his rule, they were his slaves, according to him. Now, to clarify here, the rule of Darius is roughly around the 500 BC time period, and this would make this before the empire of Alexander the Great. So Alexander's eventually going to conquer this. But nonetheless, if you take a look here, Darius does a couple of things. First of all, he's a great military leader, and he maintains this empire, and he does two things that are significant. First, he builds the city of Persepolis, right down here, which became an elaborate capital city. And from Persepolis, he builds the Royal Road. Now, going off of this will be an elaborate system of roads that will continue and would be maintained by strong military support. Now, one other thing that happened during the rule of Darius is the concept of Zoroastrianism. I try to say that a bunch of times, which became the state-mandated religion of Iran at that time. Zoroastrianism is a pretty, not a simple religion, but it's fairly easy to understand in terms of being one of the first religions that's strictly about good versus evil. The good in this particular aspect is Ahura Mazda, and here's the symbol of Ahura Mazda right here. Typically, it's the winged figure with a body at the top. And as you can see, it's prominent on some of the ancient structures in Iran, as well as modern symbols today on some of the structures that you have, or more modern symbols anyway. Now, Ahura Mazda is the light, the good wisdom, and he's the good part of this good versus evil equation. The bad part was a guy named Angra Mainyu, which was known as the destructive evil of Zoroastrianism. There are a lot of pictures of him. I just thought this one was pretty cool. It's from the more elaborate collection. Now, Darius is the one that actually lays the foundations down for a very elaborate Iranian authoritarian state. But now we're going to jump way ahead in history to about 1500 and the Safavid Dynasty. Now, the Safavids are the ones that actually bring Shiism to Iran, Shiite Muslim practices to Iran around the mid-1600s. And today, 90% of Iranians are Shiite. Well, 90% of the Safavids were Shiite. But straight out of the book of Cyrus, despite their devotion to Shiism, which is what you see in the picture here, they were actually tolerant of other religions that were in their empire as well. Along the borders of the Safavid Empire were Sunni cultures, and you got into that in the last lesson. But they also tolerated Judaism, Christianity, and continued practices in Zoroastrianism. This is the Avesta, which is the Zoroastrian Bible, if you will. And the reason they respected these three cultures is because they saw them as the quote-unquote people of the book. They all used books similar to the Muslim Quran, or similar in belief with the same God in Allah. Judaism used the Torah, Christianity used the Bible, and again, Zoroastrianism uses the Avesta. The Safavids do experience some economic difficulties, and this leads to a downfall, I guess you could say. If you remember from the basic physical geography of Iran, they are located in a region, their capital is right here, Isfahan, which is in the desert plain of Iran and makes it very, very difficult to farm in any particular area here. Now this was okay as long as there were land routes, back in the days of land routes that ran all across here in the Royal Road built by Darius and everything like that. Those land routes made it okay for trade. But when trading became more sea-based, if you'll notice here where it's located, it doesn't have a whole lot of access to the sea, and because they're far inland. Now, without that trade, they have no money for a large government or a large standing army, and we're down on D3 in the outline right now. No major standing army, so they have to rely on the local rulers to maintain order and collect taxes. So they claim, if you look down at number 4, they claim absolute power, but they don't really have it. They have to decentralize their government, and their physical geography, excuse me, between the mountains and everything else is going to fragment the empire. Many people start living in these outer regions away from the capital pretty safely without any threat that the government's going to interfere with their lives. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching.